Everybody, especially if you're here online this morning or visiting us during the week on Facebook Live or YouTube, we're glad that you're here on Soulform. We're starting back up again, obviously, in the new year. Took forever to get the ball rolling because I was suffering from COVID for so long, but it's good to be back and with everybody again today. Last week we had, was it just last week that we had the Wine and Tapas speaker series and had a guest join us, Michael Drell, who shared that perspective on pilgrimage. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about what I got out of that lecture, see what you all got out since you were both there. So we'll get some reflections on that lecture today. And then have a little project at the end of the day to kind of explore how each of us might create a kind of a destination icon that might work to create a feeling of pilgrimage for ourselves. So that's where we're going today, and hopefully this is great because you were there too. So we'll have some other insights into whether what did you get out of that lecture, like anything you took away from that. So that'd be great. Let me get started with just sort of some of the thoughts I had about this, and then we'll see what you think about that too. And then I have a little bit of an interim administrative piece to do before we get into a little small group conversation. One of the things that I think Michael talked about, and that fascinated me anyway, was, and I think I limited his articulation of this by my questions, but he definitely thinks that this idea of pilgrimage kind of invites you into what he calls trans-temporal time. But when I listened to his lecture, there was a lot of different things that I think pilgrimage can kind of help you move beyond. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. One of the things that he talked about was, like, pilgrimage allows you, if you're willing, and I'm not sure we think of this consciously, but to think about your own journey as not just your individual journey, but resting upon the many journeys that have gone before you. And so you're never walking on, especially the kind of traditional pilgrim paths, you're never really walking on that path alone. You're walking on a path that's been walked over and walked over and walked over by all these generations. And so there's something beautiful about knowing that, while we feel like individuals on a journey, we are, and yet we're joined by all those stories as well. And I think there's something about that, to imagine that every step is a step on top of all those stories that went prior to your own. When I asked him this last week, I had a little conversation with him, and I said, if you could help us do a little project where we went on a little pilgrimage ourselves as a group, where would you go? And he said, I would go to a graveyard. And I'm like, what? I could go to a graveyard? He goes, well, the graveyard is full of stories that lie beneath the ground. And I thought that's what he means by, can you imagine your pilgrim journey kind of wedded to those stories that were so vibrant and so alive, and kind of connect yourself to the history beneath the landscape that you journey on. It's really a powerful, I think, notion. So that was one. I think that was one way in which it becomes kind of trans-temporal or transpersonal, is that you see that you're not alone in this. And obviously Soulform is a way to do that when we get together as well. So I think that was one of the highlights for me. The other one was that he used this notion of communitas. Remember that? Carla, were you able to watch the video? So this is all new to you. He used this notion of communitas, and that we're never walking alone. We're always inside of a greater community as we journey. And when he said that, it reminded me of, remember when we interviewed Sandra a long time ago, when she took that rafting trip down the Colorado River at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and she talked about the way in which, they were floating down this ancient river, and you could just see all the layers of history above you in the walls of the river that had been eroded away, and this sense of how time changes and your place in time changes when you're floating in the river that has been carved through all of that history. and all of those stories and all that geography, there's something just palpable about it. It changes your sense of where you are in the world. And I think that's what Michael is hinting at, in that, can you create a pilgrimage that allows you to experience that level of connection to the communitas, whether it be a community of people or the community of nature or whatever it happens to be. I think that was a powerful example that he gave. And then the other thing that I think he hinted at in his conversation was that it also transcends, and it reminded me of Burning Man. Have any of you ever been to Burning Man? No? Me neither, nor will I ever go. But
No, people who've been.
yeah, and I think the original, some of the original intent of Burning Man was much like a pilgrimage, right? You go out into the desert, into geography, into place. There's communitas, but there's aspects of it that mirror what Michael says exists on the pilgrim path. And that is, there's a different economic model that kicks in, right? You transcend the typical economic model in that it's more of a share economy. Remember, he described if he has a problem, someone usually says, hey, let me help you out. There's this real kind of care that happens amongst the pilgrims. And I thought, oh my God, it is a way of seeing each other that lets you transcend the normal transactional relationships that we have. And we become like caretakers of each other. And he did physical therapy. He's talking about doing physical therapy. He hardly paid for any of it, because people want to provide that for you as a fellow pilgrim because they have been provided for. And so there's this economic, I think, this way of transcending the economics that we normally engage in. The same with family, right? We become kind of a family together on the pilgrimage. So the idea of who you're in relationship to and the bonds that are formed are so powerful that you kind of re-get a new family if you go on pilgrimage. It's a fascinating, we have some friends who, they're actually Lori's friends, who did a pilgrimage down the famous one that Michael was on in Spain. And the friendships they made on this pilgrimage are now their lifelong friends. They go and travel, they get together with them. There's just something very powerful about pilgrimage together. I thought that was really impressive too. And then I think there's some sense of a transcendence of geography as place, and the geography becomes the holder of story. And just a quick example. So I was going to walk here today, and I didn't because it was still dark out. So you got me on that one. So I had so much to do this morning, I had to just drive here. But I decided that my icon would be this oak tree. At first I thought it was going to be the group. I'm going to journey to the group. That's my pilgrimage. And then I thought, no, I'm going to use this great tree, because you think about this tree, it's more than just a tree. It's heard all of our stories as we sat in here. You've all watched the squirrels play on it as we've talked every week. There's been many people who've done funerals and weddings and classes in here and social events, and that doggone tree has sat through the whole thing just doing its tree thing. And I thought, think of all that it holds. And so I wanted to come and venerate, this oak that was here before they even built the building, right? It was here. So imagine the stories it holds. And I think that's what you're trying to do with pilgrimage. You're trying to take something that elevate it to the point where it goes beyond geography and it becomes something richer, more beautiful, more engaging. I think that's definitely a promise that Michael made that can happen in pilgrimage. So that was layer one, that whole kind of transforming time, relationships, geography, family, all that's available in pilgrimage, which is great. Then I talked to him a little bit about, and if you have questions along the way, just stop me, or if you have some insights, we'll use the microphone.
So there's a different context.
Hold on, because I want people to hear your comments. Hello. Yes, Carla?
So there's a different context between pilgrimages and immigration?
Oh, immigration? Definitely. A pilgrimage, well, I don't know about that. I mean, that's a really good question. Yeah, Allison, I mean, I bet there's aspects of pilgrimage in an immigration journey when it's, you're setting out to a new life, there's all that kind of energy, new geography, new family, new economies. So I bet you could bring the spirit of pilgrimage to an immigration journey for sure. I bet there's there's some characteristics that cross over for sure. Yeah.
Well, one of the questions that we did talk about then, and I think we'll talk about now, is that pilgrimage involves, a destination. You're
Yeah.
going to this specific place. You're not just hiking the High Sierra.
Yeah.
Even if you're hiking the High Sierra, it is to go to that rock or mountain or tree.
Yeah.
And so the big question is, can it be a pilgrimage without a destination?
Yeah.
And so
When he was of the mind that you needed a destination, that's why I decided to pick I don't know that I agreed with him at first. I'm like, well, what do you mean? I go backpacking in the wilderness, it feels like pilgrimage to me. But he liked to have some specific not ending place, but where you
a goal, as it were, even
Yeah.
if it's you do your usual hike, but it's that tree you're going to,
Yeah,
not just
yeah.
the larger thing. So
Yeah, I'm curious if that changes. It is a curious aspect of pilgrimage that I think he brought up, but
And talking about pilgrims, destination, in the U.S., the Pilgrims presumably landed at Plymouth Rock.
Yeah, yeah.
And what were they pilgrimaging from and to?
Yeah.
It was, I think, an immigration
yes,
movement.
yes, absolutely. I mean, where the term comes from is rooted in immigration, of course.
And it seems that immigrants have it seems like even with the massive immigration that we're seeing now, they have a point of destination
Yeah.
that they just are getting blocked from.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And I'll bet that if you talk to those who are taking a very risky journey, right, to that destination, that I bet it has some iconic characteristics to it, right? It's idealized, possibly. It's given meaning maybe more than it holds to those of us who reside here, right? So it's elevated up, and that there's this thing of venerating the icon. That's what Michael talks about. And I'm not sure I like that because it's elevating this thing, but there is something about honoring, like figuring out a way to honor that towards which you are headed. And he thinks that has an effect on the walk, on the path you walk. So I think there's something to it, but I don't quite know if I got my head wrapped around it. So
I'm on your side.
yeah. So I asked him to, and I think this is an interesting one. The second layer is sort of, I asked him about pilgrimage spirituality, and he said, well, it's everything and it's nothing. Remember that line? He did that often. I'm like, what do you mean it's everything and it's nothing? And I've been thinking about that. And what struck me was that the pilgrimage, what I like about pilgrimage is there's no real, it's not like an institution or it's not like organized religion. It is just the path you walk. So you're not, when you're a pilgrim, you're not sustaining some entity, you're just walking your life journey inside of some intentionality. So there's no infrastructure necessarily that you have to manage, and it doesn't have its own identity. You're the one walking, right? So you don't walk to maintain the pilgrimage, you just walk, and you don't have this infrastructure you have to maintain. So it's very personal and disconnected from sort of a requirement to maintain it. I'll give you an example. Unlike kind of organized religion, right? It doesn't have all this, it doesn't own property. It's just a path. It doesn't have leaders necessarily. You just walk it to your destination. And there's something about it that I kind of like that. And at the same time, along the path, he says all this infrastructure begins to be birthed, right? Hospitals, venues that feed you or care for you. There's a whole lifestyle that emerges on the path as the pilgrims go on this path over and over again. Yeah, Alan.
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to distinguish, though, between religious pilgrimage and the most famous, again, being in Islam with the pilgrimage to Mecca, the destination being the birthplace of Muhammad,
Right.
that kind of thing, and then more general, either secular or even spiritual pilgrimages.
Yeah.
And, for example, in the U.S., the folks that landed in Massachusetts, what became Massachusetts, were then secular pilgrims.
Yeah.
Even though the story that we've all heard is that they were fleeing religious persecution, which I'm sure they were. But
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I like what he says is that you, especially if you're building your own creative pilgrimage, whatever your, iconic location is that you're headed towards, that you're co-creating that in real time. So I do like that option, right? I wonder if I can, create an intentional path by holding up some destination that I want to honor in that journey. I talked to Cynthia about being a medical doctor and saying, could she set up the icon of the patient in the waiting room who's waiting for her to arrive, and so she journeys down the hallway waiting for this moment to see what happens. That might be too much, but there's too many icons in a given day. But there's just something about setting up the intentionality of that, right? That you're holding something at the end of that journey that you hold as important or valuable, and how does that change the way you approach it? And what happens to you along the way is kind of co-creating your own.
no, I think that they are undertaking the pilgrimage to you.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. Yeah, Carla.
So it sounds like with pilgrimage, in the religious sense, there is an objective at the end. Is it spiritual enlightenment when you get to ground zero? Is that?
It's a really good question. He would say that you carry into the journey no expectation. So you're not trying to solve a problem or fix something or achieve something by it. You're just seeing what blessings come your way, what insights come your way on the walk. And it goes to his last point in that he was talking about taking pilgrimages and what do you carry in your pack? How do you prepare yourself for it? And the answer he came up with was, you will need stuff for the journey, but you want to walk pretty lightly because you're gonna pick up something beautiful that you want to carry with you along the way. And he talks about literally carrying stuff in his pack that he's like, I don't need this anymore, and giving it away to others along the way, right? You're emptying yourself a little bit as you journey because you're taking on this, there's more there waiting for you that you want to receive. So don't be too intentional or too focused. So it's a balancing act between the two. He described when he was walking his pilgrimage, how the Germans were they had all the high-tech gear and they were walking faster than he was. They're totally focused. And having some German in me, I get how that works. But there was another woman, I can't remember where she's from, she just had a little bag, very minimalist. She was on her journey. I think that's his advice, is to maybe think about what you shouldn't be taking along on this rather than what you should be taking along on this. So you're not heading there to achieve something. You're just heading there, and the path itself creates the experience for you at some level. It's a little bit like the conversation we had. Oh, Allison, you want to pitch in on this one? Because I'm going to go to this next idea before I do.
One of my friends who, coincidentally, I didn't tell her, came to this meeting.
Oh, yeah.
She's done 5 or 6 of these. And for her, my perception of it is it's a recentering and a focus, that it's almost a reset of her life, this experience.
So she gives herself a process.
Yes, yeah, and that's my question of that it's more the process and the goal, because the origin of nearly all these is religious. The traditional Camino through Spain, which is the one everyone thinks of, there's a giant cathedral at the end of that, and there's a ceremony and a certificate and all that stuff. And, you know, a lot, not as elaborate as Mecca, but a lot of the Lourdes, you know, a lot of the European ones have this very religious destination. And in other religions, I went to a place up in Nepal where both the Hindus and the Buddhists, I think it was the Buddhists.
That sounds right.
But there was a flame coming out of a rock and also a spring coming out of a rock in this area, you know, way up in the mountains. And so that was a busy pilgrimage site, but it often, traditionally, I think it has been religious. And the pilgrims, I mean, they were there for religious reasons. They had left for religious reasons and then established their own no-tolerance zone when they got here.
Well, and I do love that. I mean, we're, in a way, in our time, we're trying to recreate the structure of pilgrimage, but taking some of that religious baggage off of it, and yet letting it still work for us, right? And I think Soulform does a little bit of that too, right? We're not necessarily trying to impose a religious structure on our time together, but using our time together to explore and be open and see what comes our way and how it shapes us and moves us and informs us. So there is I think that's the model I think I would advocate for at some level. He talked about, and we've had this conversation here just briefly and then I'll wrap this up, but he talked about agency, right? There's something about, while we think we're the agents driving the pilgrimage, I think we participate in the action of it, but more comes our way in the pilgrimage than we could actually construct ourselves, right? We're not necessarily in charge of constructing the outcome. It just kind of happens. It's got its own agency, so to speak. And he liked the both and of that. It reminded me of, in Islam, there's this phrase, if you take one step towards Allah, Allah will come running towards you. And it has that same energy, right? Yet there is some agency that you impose on yourself to make something happen, but that just creates the possibility of something beautiful occurring. You don't have to control that part. And I think I kind of like that. I'm not sure I do that all the time, but I kind of like that approach. Let me see if there's anything else. I think those were the basics I got out of his talk, and what I'm going to propose for you all today, hopefully you gave it a little bit of thought, is to think about what, if you had to pick, create an iconic destination, something that becomes your focal point, you know, what might that be? And then we'll talk about why would you do that? Alan?
One of the most interesting comments from last week that I heard was from you, Dan.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, and it was a reference you made to, I think it was time as a normative force.
Yes.
And that obviously stuck with me.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, so I think what I was trying to unpack was this idea of trans-temporal, that oftentimes we think of time in a particular way, and so we as a culture will norm the way in which time works, and then we all operate within that, right? So I'll give you a perfect example, and then once I'm done with the example, you can shut it off. Like, we were in South Africa for a time visiting some friends, and we went to church in South Africa because he was a clergy person there, and church starts at 9 o'clock. So time from the Western mindset is that church starts at 9. I'm sitting ready to go, 9 o'clock. No one shows up till close to 10. And I'm like, Arden, what is going on here? He goes, well, they don't have the same sense of time, right? They have a different sense of time. So if you want something to happen now, you don't say, can we do that now? You say, I want to have that happens to happen now. You know, there's this whole reinforcement of, oh, you don't mean now, you mean now. So I think time can become this normative construct that we all agree upon and then operate within. But what Michael was talking about was, it's okay to kind of deconstruct that construct inside of the journey and just be present for the moment so that time take on more of a, like they have in the biblical narrative, this is why I referenced Kairos time, this sense of the fullness of the moment, that the moment itself is full, but we often tether it to some sort of time. And when we do that, we choke it of its fullness and we drive it towards some particular construct that we want. So I think Sandra experienced that in the river, the Colorado River. I bet a lot of you experienced that out in nature, or maybe even, in meditation, where you, all of a sudden time, falls apart and you're like, I'm in this different moment. That's what I was trying to play around with a little bit. All right, well, we're going to let you go. If you have your iconic destination, whether you're online with us today, put it in an email or in the comments so that we can hear where you're going, and then we'll talk about that next week when we get together. So we'll see you next Sunday for Soul Forum. Yeah.